Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the second briefing of today for Defence and Space. Brought a coffee with me this time. Keep us going. I'm Steve Tester, the CEO and the co-founder of Showcase SA. We are an independent, privately owned and run organisation whose sole purpose is to connect South Australian businesses across all industries and highlight opportunities with those industries. So today is an example of bringing some of the best minds together to shine a bit of a light into defence and space. This morning we had construction, and after lunch we have technology, where we talk some satellites and flying race cars, and investment for this afternoon. That's me. If you need to connect on LinkedIn, or if you get, somewhat bored with our speech, you can certainly just jump on social media. When we decided that we'd jump in and set up today's expo and lunch and briefings, we did it purely independently as Showcase SA. We stepped in to support. Office of Industry Advocate had previously run Meet the Buyer, and it wasn't going ahead this year, and this is the year I think that South Australian businesses needed to understand supply chains and opportunities. So we stepped in. We do have support from the Office of Industry Advocate because of their previous involvement. So thank you to Ian Nightingale and his team. Special thank you to the Department for Trade and Investment. So they have a stand here, but they're upstairs in their Goida mezzanine, beaming in their DTI offices from around the world to get an insight into what's happening in Singapore, India, that's an interesting one, Houston, and also the UK, depending on the time of the day. So thank you to them. Special thank you to Ventia, who we heard from earlier, who's stepped in to support us today. The Aspen Group, who have a stand here, so I advised to go and catch up with them, and Ikigai Capital and the team from BGIS, who have supported our coffee machine today, which is quite possibly the busiest hub out there. So this is just a small video from Ventia. I know what you're all thinking. How can you get your video up on that screen? Sponsorship people, come and talk to us. Let acknowledgement to the people because of COVID restrictions today. We are Zooming in a lot of people online that can't be in the room because of obvious restrictions. So hello to them. So thank you to Ventia. Just a quick mention for the Adelaide Showgrounds, who, when we rang them to actually book this event in, were pretty surprised. We wanted to do something over 1,000 people. So thank you for taking the booking. A little shout out to annual members, supporters with Loftus, Statewide Super and Optus and the Voitech Group. Showcase SA, as I said, what we do is we connect South Australian businesses. We have an absolute plethora of big end of town, SMEs. How we connect is big businesses to small businesses, because the big businesses in South Australia, they can't exist without the SMEs. So we're a conduit to help connect. I've seen that one already. So. A little bit of some upcoming events for the next coming months, masterclasses, networking. They missed it off there, but we've got agribusiness next month, which we've got a long table lobster lunch at the National Wine Centre. Also at the Wine Centre, with our support of the wine industry in South Australia, which we've propped up across COVID restrictions, we do have a 2-day expo where there's 200 different varieties up for tasting with COVID distancing at the National Wine Centre. So if you scan that code, everyone loves a good QR code at the moment, that'll get you 20% off. Our industry series, which we supersized and managed to cram about 4 months worth of briefings into one day today. So I haven't been able to do it, but special thank you to my team. I won't point them out because they're scattered throughout the building today, but doing an outstanding job, that normally having a couple of hundred people in the room compared to 12 to 1,500 is an outstanding feat. Membership-based organisation, we support you by being here with free entry. We would love for your businesses to be involved in membership with us. If you're not quite sure what we do, come and talk to us on our stand or look around and see all the business opportunities, and pretty much what we stand for. All right, let's get started. So, without further ado, I'm going to welcome to the stage. We have Warren Bowden from Lursen Australia, Audra McCarthy from the Defence Teaming Centre, Jim McDowell from Nova Systems, and Darren Lovett from the South Australia Space Industry Centre. So, want to join me on stage? Starting with you. Just as a quick one, Warren's been brilliant to jump in to support because Jens was coming back from WA and is currently in isolation. So part of the roller coaster of running face-to-face events at the moment. So thank you. There or there, whatever's easy.
Steve, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks for the introduction, Steve. So Jens was due to present to you today. As Steve said, Jens was making his way back from Western Australia with his family and unfortunately got caught up in quarantine, so hence I got the call up to talk to you today. It is a pleasure to be able to talk with you today and provide an update of the C1180 program and also an insight into Lursen's activities. So the C1180 program is a Navy acquisition program that is set to deliver offshore patrol vessels for the Australian Navy. The program started with Lursen signing in 2018 and will conclude in 2030 after the delivery of 12 offshore patrol vessels. The offshore patrol vessel is approximately 80 metres in length and is based off of a design that is currently in operation with the Royal Brunei Navy. We currently have 4 OPVs in construction across 2 sites, so there's no excuse to be bored. At South Australia is the commencement of the first 2 offshore patrol vessels. The first offshore patrol vessel will be called Arafura. It started in 2018, so the same year the contract was signed, and keel laying ceremony was conducted in May 2019. And essentially the keel laying milestone symbolises 50 tonnes of steel constructed for her hull. Currently, Arafura is on the hard stand and blast and paint activities are continuing, particularly externally, and internally the systems are being installed and starting to be commissioned. OPV number 2 will be called Air. Air started in June 2019, and as we're all familiar with, the kill ceremony was conducted under COVID restrictions in 2020. Currently, Air's in 2 half ships in one of the sheds down at the Osborne shipyard, and currently going through extensive outfitting and blast and paint activities internally. And a lot of the lessons learnt from Ship 1 are starting to be flown into Ship 2. Over in Western Australia, again, another 2 offshore patrol vessels in construction. Offshore patrol vessel number 3 will be called Pilbara. That started in March 2020, and keel laying was conducted in September 2020. Currently, it resides in the outfitting and assembly hall over at Civmex facilities in Henderson, and as you can see, starting to pull the hull together, and the superstructure which sits on top will be installed shortly. OPV number 4, Gippsland, started in January 2021, and we're working with our customer to schedule the keel laying ceremony for her. Essentially, the blocks for the hull are in construction in the fabrication bays, and Ship 5 will start construction later this year. So Lursen is an organisation and company that's been around for the better part of 145 years. It's based in Germany and a 4th generation shipyard. I'm very fortunate to be able to bring the design and the construction techniques out to Australian shipyards, whether that's in the way the ship is built, or even the way that the infrastructure has been designed for production workflows and machinery equipment fit-outs. We're proud to be working with our partners and our suppliers collaboratively, whether that's through our constant communication or our structured working groups and review boards. And with the COVID restrictions, we've seen an intense cross-pollination, particularly with the upcoming commissioning and set to work, where a lot of our original equipment manufacturers that reside overseas cannot make it to Australia. So being able to connect local SMEs and suppliers to be able to install and conduct those activities on board. Also keeping our customer close and working collaborative with them and working through the program. We're looking forward to a bright future. At the moment, we're currently discussing future projects for the Commonwealth, particularly in another acquisition project, 1905, which is set to replace the mine hunters and survey ships. And we're also excited to potentially be able to export Australian-made SME products, whether that's into the global Lursen supply chain or exporting that out of Lursen, Australia. I think it's probably the vision and the working with our suppliers and keeping that engagement that has seen Lursen have success in exceeding our Australian industry capability content. It is a requirement for us to have a 60%, which we're currently exceeding at the moment. And with the upcoming capabilities and the inevitable obsolescence, we really look forward to leveraging the foundations that we have with our suppliers, exceeding the AIC content and supporting the Commonwealth in providing their vision of having an Australian sovereign shipbuilding capability. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Next up, Audrey McCarthy. Do you want to stand there? Here.
Is there slides? No, there's no slides. Thanks, Steve. Yes, my name is Audra McCarthy, and clearly I'm a short person. I can't even make it up on this stool there. So I'm the CEO of the Defence Teaming Centre, and I know that you are all here to hear about the defence sector, which I have to admit is an exciting sector here in South Australia. The DTC, we serve to connect our members to opportunities in defence, and most importantly, we develop our members to meet the needs of defence, and we also advocate on behalf of our members to inform defence industry policy. Our organisation has been in existence for almost 25 years. So there's 25 years of connecting members to one another and helping industry to build and grow and embrace opportunities in defence. I say we're a not-for-loss organisation because any proceeds we make, we reinvest back into the organisation to develop industry. All of our profits go back to our members in the form of services and outcomes. Now, here in South Australia, it is an exciting time for defence. We have some amazing shipbuilding programs occurring out at Osborne. We also have electronic warfare occurring out at Edinburgh. So there's a number of opportunities here in our own backyard. But the defence sector is unlike any other sector you'll operate in. It is a sector where you only have one customer. And that means there are some nuances to the sector that you won't find in any other way that you do business. Think about that for a second. You are all competing for work, and the one end user is a single customer. There is no other sector that operates like that. So it's a highly competitive market, and the customers are usually your defence primes, your Tier 2, the Department of Defence, and at the end of the day, the end user is the Australian warfighter. That makes it a very unique sector to be operating in. Now, because of the challenges that the kit and services that you might be delivering into are pushed to their limits, and the kit is designed to keep men and women safe, that means the companies who are delivering into those supply chains must meet the utmost best quality standards. Their delivery must be optimal. When we're building ships and companies like Lursen have a schedule to meet, that schedule means we have a ship that can be deployed so that we can secure our borders. If you're late, that means they don't meet their schedule. That means our borders are exposed. So we need companies who can deliver on time. Now, as we embark on a very important industrialisation program for Australia, we're seeing defence acknowledge industry as a fundamental input to capability. That means, for the very first time in our industrialisation history, the government is now backing Australian industry to get on board for defence projects. Defence primes, the government, defence, are looking for Australian industry to become part of this amazing supply chain. But they're not looking for just anyone. They're looking for companies who are committed to the security, to the quality, and to the expectations of the sector. If you're thinking you'll enter into the defence sector and you'll make a quick buck, and if you think you have been working in perhaps an adjacent sector, medical, oil and gas, and you are going to win big and get a purchase order within a year, that's highly unlikely. Defence supply chains take about 3 to 5 years for an opportunity to come to fruition. That's the harsh reality. Why? Because defence is slow. Decisions take a long time. Governments change, policy change, government direction, defence posture changes. And it takes a while, a long time in fact, for SMEs to be able to go through the accreditation processes required. But the benefits of the sector are this. This sector is largely resilient to recession, and we saw that last year during COVID. Industries like hospitality, services industry were hit hard by COVID, but defence soldiered on. We needed those projects, we needed those assets, and we needed those assets to be produced on time. So the benefits of getting into the defence supply chains is actually offers diversification to your business, but it's not easy. The DTC is here to help organisations navigate that. We're not here to produce a purchase order for you. We're not here to make stuff happen. We're here to help you learn. We're here to help you navigate, and we're here to actually fast-track that development process for you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the speakers. If you've got any questions, I look forward to hearing them whilst I lean on my tall stool. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Jim McDowell. Need no more introduction, Jim?
Thank you very much.
I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. Yep. So first of all, I acknowledge we gather today on the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about Nova and the success story that it is. No credit to me, I've only been there about 5 months. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about what I call sovereign capability, which is a notion that's been significantly more widespreadly discussed in the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic with regard to everything from face masks to medical supply chains. It's been an active discussion in defence for many years, but we may now have a chance to bring it to fruition because of the greater, wider discussion of sovereignty and Australian sovereignty. I am Australian, by the way. I just put this accent on to fool people. So you're going to have to listen very carefully. So Nova, everyone has a vision, and a smart people solving complex challenges, making our world safe and secure, which is really what the defence industry does. Smart people, because these are very, very, very difficult problems, very complex challenges that you have to solve. And the object is to make the world safe and secure. Nova Group itself, 2 people, started it 20 years ago, a former flight test pilot and a flight test engineer, set up on what looked like a brick dunny up at Edinburgh Parks, and formed the Nova company with their specialty effectively being in test evaluation, system safety certification, capability requirements definition. And then on the journey we have bought some geospatial capability, some by acquisition, some by organic growth, and project management services. So from those 2 people on their own, 20 years ago, it's a company that now turns over just a tick under 300 million this year. It'll be a bit more than a tick over 300 million next year. About 700 employees, slightly more than that. The vast majority of them, 600 or so in Australia, a few in the UK, a few in Norway, a few in Singapore. 300 subcontractors, 26 graduates this year. So it's a company really growing Australian and South Australian capability. We have operations in South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales. Just to give you an idea what a small company starting from 2 people with a vision, and it must be said the Royal Australian Air Force have a lot to answer for, because they paid for Mr. Wally's MBA, during which he devised the business plan for the Nova Group of companies, and that's what you see today. And from those 2 people you can see the significant programs that the company has been involved in, very large multi-million, multi-billion dollar programs, particularly providing T&E and certification services to build the business to the size it has become today. Now we have a talk about sovereignty. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty means control. If you have sovereignty over something, you have control over it. The Queen has sovereignty over the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The President of the United States has sovereignty over the United States. It doesn't mean you influence it. It doesn't mean that you participate in it. It doesn't just mean that you create jobs in it. It means that you have at least an element of control. And that is the difference between sovereignty and influence. And we would say this, wouldn't we? But sovereignty can mean, it's not going to mean the same thing in each of the disciplines or in each of the so-called SICPs, or the Sovereign Industrial Capability Plans that Defence have been producing. Our view is that you should strive to get the most sovereign position you can that's value for money. And that means, for example, if you're building very complex submarines, you will never have the same level of sovereignty that you do over another SICP sector that I'm going to talk about in a moment. The fact is we have ceded that position 35, 45, 50 years ago. You could say the same for complex shipbuilding. You could say the same for very complex armoured vehicles. You could say the same for a continuous shipbuilding program, where you have to take a position that is the best that you can get. The best that you can get is a definition of Australian sovereignty where the controlling shareholders are Australian, where the headquarters are in Australia, where there is no or very little foreign influence on decisions with regard to the raising and allocation of capital, the funding and protection of intellectual property, mergers and acquisitions and disposals. In other words, discretionary spend is controlled by an Australian entity with Australian directors and preferably Australian shareholders, at least in a majority, at least in control. Sovereignty equals control. So I accept that in all of many of the verticals in the sovereign industry capability plans, we have already ceded a position, and the best that we can hope for is employment, is good jobs, is investment, is IP access, if not control. But we shouldn't settle for that if we don't have to. And the one SICP that we don't have to is the test and evaluation, systems assurance and certification, where we can have complete control of that with Australian-owned companies. And I would say that as we are probably the biggest one of those in the country who specialise in this activity. The UK has entered into an agreement with Kinetic, who do the same sort of thing, for 25 years to control that in the UK. That gives them sovereignty. I believe the Australian Department of Defence should do the same here. All of the other SICPs are verticals, so it's shipbuilding or vehicle buildings or submarine or continuous shipbuilding. This is a horizontal test and evaluation. It applies across all of those environments. It's ubiquitous, land, sea, air, joint, and it's enduring from start to finish, from acquisition, design, through to disposal. Everything has to be tested and evaluated along that life cycle. So my call is that we have the capability to this one sovereign piece of work that the government, that the Department of Defence has defined as requiring sovereignty. We can exercise almost complete sovereignty over this without the aid of any of the overseas. And I was chief executive of BAE for many years, and it's a great company. But this is one area of endeavour where Australia can and should maintain sovereign control. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jim. Darren Lovett.
Testing. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone, for being here just before lunch. I too would like to recognise the lands on which we meet, the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I'm Darren Lovett. I'm the Director of Space for the South Australian Space Industry Centre, a state government body, and I'm really here to talk to you about a new and emerging sector that we really hope to crack into the global market. It's quite exciting. As the Minister said this morning, we're really at a pivotal moment in time for the space industry. I estimate we have about 3 to 5 years to either crack this or we'll walk away and think it was a bad idea. And the opportunities are there. What I'm going to do is I'll give you a snapshot of the sector. We'll have questions afterwards, but I'm just going to take you through some of the things that are happening in this sector because they're quite interesting. Okay, just last year, we had a launch from Kaniba. This is a small township northwest of Ceduna, 40 k's out on the Eyre Peninsula. It was the first space-capable rocket that Australia has launched commercially ever, and also the first space-capable rocket that we've launched really, since the heyday of the 60s out of Woomera, we've had a few other things go up, but this rocket, fairly small, but it's just demonstrating and bringing us back into some of the capability that is really trying to push forward technology, and we're doing things in a different way to how the US might do it. And back to Audra's point, my background is defence. I've had a few decades in defence, working projects. And my lessons learned from the US is that they are stymied by their own stovepipes. They're culturally mired into a way of doing old space that's heavy lift into geo and other things. And the opportunities we're looking at are really that much closer threshold to Earth. So we're talking anywhere from 300 to 500 kilometres above the planet. That's not very far, okay? It's right above our heads. So what else has been going on? Well, we had the return of a satellite from an asteroid last year, Hayabusa, 5th of December. It had been out in space for 6 years. So admittedly, it was a Japanese experiment, but it landed at Woomera and again brought to the world stage, what's happening in South Australia. Just a few weeks ago, we had the opening of the Australian Space Discovery Centre, something the state government's invested in, at the bottom of Lot 14 in one of the buildings where the space agency is. This is Questacon for space, brought out of Canberra. We're doing it in Adelaide. It's aimed at 14 to 24-year-olds and really trying to show young people where the jobs are going to lie for space in the future. And then some of the other activities, we had Rover Challenge, Adelaide Uni. So on the back of COVID, can't go to the US to do some of these cool robotic competitions where they sort of mass every year. So we brought it to Adelaide, and we're now doing it here, cementing that competition in Adelaide on behalf of Australia. Phenomenal capability and really exciting to see. The Australian Space Forum. We've had the 11th Space Forum just at the end of March. 700 people attended live, 1,100 registrations globally, people from Brazil, USA, UK, Canada. And 5 years ago, this was a forum that had about 60 people in it, and I was one of them. And I remember going there. You'd get the classic space people, a few people wearing strange hats, some there for free lunches. And now we're actually allowed to charge to keep out a lot of the randoms. But it's a phenomenal capability that's occurring in Adelaide. And we're hoping to get the International Astronautical Congress in another couple of years, which will bring potentially 8,000 people here to do that. Now, our vision. We released our strategy end of last year, and the Premier announced this. And it's quite simple. We want to build stuff, we want to launch it from South Australia, we want to get the data, and we want to make use of it for our residents here in South Australia. And converting that vision into action is something that the government's absolutely committed to, and I'll go through some of the themes for that. Okay, this is the boring slide. This is our strategy in a nutshell. There are 3 pillars to this. We want to contribute to national strategy. So back to Audra's point, this is not just commercial, civil, space agency stuff. This is defence. There is $8 to $15 billion slated for defence space capabilities in the current strategic plan for 2020, and we want to get a piece of that. At the moment, Australia is the second largest procurer of US weapons, just behind Saudi Arabia. It doesn't make sense. We can produce stuff here by leapfrogging technology, getting over, say, copper, making use of this new space domain. And that means launch. We want to launch stuff. We want to launch it out of Whalers Way. We want to support norms for actors, and we want to do a couple of other offshoots like Moon to Mars, food production in space, where we have some benefits here. The centre pillar is the big one. Making use of the data that comes down from all of this stuff. So overhead, thousands of satellites. We're talking anywhere from 10 to 150 kilos, meshed together, lots of them moving at 26,000 kilometres over the poles or around the equator, just overhead. And we want to make use of the petabytes of data that are coming down. So if you're in AI or machine learning, there is a huge opportunity to make use of that space information that's currently sitting in servers all around the world, largely untapped because it's been the domain of great powers in the security area. And the final thing is we want to keep doing what South Australia has been doing really well, which is making this place a great place to go for business, for space. And my job is to help build that enduring space ecosystem. And if you have any ideas or you want to get into that, then please come and see us at the SA Space Industry Centre. Jim Medall's on my right. He was a key part of this mission that we released earlier this year. The Premier announced it in January, Feb. We're going to be putting a satellite up into space. Now, that may sound cool, but actually a lot of countries and a lot of companies are doing this. The big thing for this is that this is a state-funded mission to get 3 years of data down on behalf of our own purposes. We're going to get South Australian companies to build it, working together, Myriota and Innovor. The Smart SAS CSC is going to lead it. But importantly, we're going to bring in state government entities like SA Police, Department of Environment and Water, SA Water, CFS and others to make use of some of that Internet of Things technology, so beaming stuff up that's very cheap with a battery that lasts 8 to 10 years on a chip that big, and then also imagery, bringing that back down to farmers and agriculturists so that we can make use of the rich pieces of information coming down from space. This is just a snapshot, but we have great companies here, world-class companies. Myriota was the first company in the world outside of the US to get Boeing Horizon X venture capitalist investment a few years ago. I was in Boeing at the time and I was told to go help make them successful. These are the sorts of things that are happening in just the local community here. We've got great infrastructure. Just take a look at Lot 14, one of the 3 innovation hubs we have, including Mawson Lakes, Technology Park, and also Tonsley. But $500 million is going into there to make this a space and entrepreneurial ecosystem. And also Mission Control, we've won the rights to that. So Mission Control, with the first Australian Mission Control, will be in Lot 14. And we're also working on launch out of Kaniba and Whalers Way. Whalers Way will be polar launch south over the poles. Again, new real estate, opening up new opportunities for space. We've got some great research strengths, 3 leading universities. The Smart SAS CRC has about $250 million to work with in terms of investment, both federal, $55 million, and private investment. DSTG up the road is doing their resilient multi-mission starshots, so they're looking to bring forward and bring up the weight class for space sovereign capability for the defence. And Machine Learning and Institute of Photonics are doing fantastic capabilities as well. And then finally, we want to inspire our future workforce. If you haven't seen the news, we're having a competition to name that first satellite. Now, this has attracted more interest from news media outlets than anything else we've done, because we're inviting any school in the state to offer up a name. I've already heard Sadie McSatface 100 times, and that was one of the things there will be an adult committee over the top to make sure that the name we get is reasonable. But yeah, 600 schools are allowed to plan that, and that's to attract those kids. We're looking at 9-year-olds, trying to get them into STEM, but also liberal arts, ethics, law, people who can move fuels, propellants, who can underwrite risk and insurance for space. So the whole community needs to be pulled in to build this. And there's a lot of other things happening in the state as well. Sorry, this is my last slide too. And we're trying to accelerate ideas to industry. So we invest heavily in UniSA's venture catalyst space. We've got 10 startups looking to start very soon to grow into space. Gravity Challenge, we've got Deloitte in the room as well, really a strong supporter of that, which is bringing space solutions to terrestrial problems. And we're supportive of Stone and Chalk at the entrepreneurial hub in Lot 14. Okay, that's my bit, and I have questions.
Thanks, Darren. That's brilliant. I'm going to throw the first question out. If anyone out there has a couple of questions, Brooke is roaming with the mic. Jim, I'm going to throw out, I did a webinar in the middle of lockdown with Jim Wally last year, and his comment was, so this was April, even with the Defence Force, with so many contracts being brought forward, so as we've said, quite resilient to recession, Jim was saying even the biggest, if they, like for Nova, if they don't look outside of their own industries, there's potential in 3 to 4 years for those contracts to dry up. What's your thoughts on that?
No, if I just look at the defence investment plan, you can see the money's only going one way. Now, it may well be you get adjacent players who are able to play in the market. And in professional services, it's not limited to defence professional services company. All of the big four, for example, play in that market, which is why there's pressure on margins, which is why you have to maybe change the business model a bit. But I won't openly disagree with the owner of the company So we're both right in that.
He was in his Ugg boots and, in a webinar. Do we have some questions?
My question is for Warren Lurson. Warren, my understanding is the OPVs being built in South Australia are just the lead ships, with the majority being built in WA. What's Lurson's long-term plan for South Australia?
That's a good question, Scott. Thank you. If you look at the shipbuilding industry and how it is increasing so rapidly, it does make sense for Lurson to maintain a presence in South Australia and retain the skills and experience that it has gained. It is something that we are actively looking at, having that continuing presence, whether that's a satellite organisation or not, but being able to hold that and support the infrastructure and the design and construction in Western Australia. And I think COVID is a good example of being able to show that you don't need to be in the shipyard, you can be at a satellite city or down the road on the WebEx or in a different state. So I think it's a challenge for a lot of organisations, particularly as construction moves into maintenance and sustainment. And you can see from the Commonwealth's plans of expanding the ports for sustainment and maintenance, particularly up in the northern areas of Australia. So that's something that Lurson's doing, but it's a problem I'm sure that we're all discussing at the senior management team meetings.
Can I just add to that too? One of the things that we didn't highlight is that in the defence sector we hear about the acquisition programs and the amount of opportunities there are, but acquisition comes with peaks and troughs. And we don't talk about the sustainment opportunities. So when we talk about peaks and troughs, we talk about that we're going to build 9 ships, 9 frigates, X amount of submarines, depending on who's in government. But we don't talk about the 30 years of sustaining those submarines. We don't talk about, or we don't hear about the 20 years that the aircraft need to be sustained. And there are many businesses in this room who are actually engaged and have won long-term contracts in the sustainment side of the piece. So when we look at the defence budget, it's actually broken down roughly into thirds. A third of it is roughly going into acquisition. A third of it's actually going into sustainment. And that's work where Australian industry excels and has the greatest opportunity, because that's work where the requirement for having the control, the sovereignty of that sustainment is paramount. And it's a lot easier for the government to achieve the sovereignty for Australia through the sustainment than it is actually in the acquisition phase.
The other thing I would say is that the object of this round of shipbuilding contracts was to start a continuous shipbuilding programme. So to try as best as possible to avoid those big peaks and troughs, which can partially be filled in by sustainment. But I think you will see a pattern of complex ships being built in South Australia, slightly less complex ships, nonetheless difficult ships being built in Western Australia. And the problem for both of us is going to be getting enough people to be able to sustain that rolling programme, plus the sustainment through the lifetime of the surface fleet and the submarine fleet. It's no longer an issue of not enough work, it'll be an issue of not enough people if we don't get our skates on with regard to training people and bringing them into the workforce.
All right, everyone, I'm going to wrap it up there and say a special thank you to Warren for stepping in, greatly appreciated. Audra, because this time in March last year, Audra spoke on our defence and space briefing about 2 weeks before lockdown, so great to be back on stage with you today. Darren Lovett and also Jim McDowell, much appreciated. A round of applause for our panellists, please.